or any other stock, it must be stream, and secondly, to give you a way of participating in this untapped and yet to be created industry. I'm getting carried away, and so I shall leave it at this point.
So, Prof. Mike, we're hearing then that one of the challenges is access to information. So, as a research institution such as yourselves, being funded by the state to, in essence, develop new knowledge, there seems to be an issue with the translation of that new knowledge into useful products and services that we're hearing private sector crying for. Just tell us, from your perspective, what do you think is the challenge around being able to translate, make that information available to smallholder farmers? Perhaps I know those challenges. It might be an issue of where this information is going and who is receiving this information. But perhaps inform us, enlighten us on what do you think is the challenge with that, making that information available since it's created by yourselves as the knowledge creators. Thank you.
Thank you. The knowledge per se is not the translation issue. Yes, we do. I think it's a structural challenge in my view. For example, if you see the Establishment Act of the ARC, it is created to generate knowledge. And its funding instrument and its enabling systems stop there. So there is some lack of synergy between the knowledge creation mandate of the ARC and in the translation mandate of the National Department of Agriculture and provincial departments of agriculture, the coherence. So people so often tend to point their fingers towards the ARC. I would like to mention that whenever we get a visit from our Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, they always get fascinated with the volume of work the ARC produces and with the amount of research that we have. And the question always is, but why is this thing not with our farmers? And the simple answer is that this is not the question that the ARC must answer, because the ARC is designed or created to develop knowledge and technologies and enabling mechanisms for those knowledge to be translated. But the translation component is structurally sits with other arms of government. So that is how I would put it. Perhaps we need to work on that one. The other area, perhaps going back to the previous question of challenge, I would like to also mention it that there is also a behavioral challenge within the agriculture system that we have to deal with. For example, so often, especially in our day and time, there is this increasing tendency of defining agriculture as a business and measuring its success and failure from profit and loss. For me, that is the fundamental problem that we need to deviate from, because especially in the context of the African continent, agriculture is not a mere business. It's way more than that. Agriculture is where society is created, where norms and cultures are built. You know, you don't create that citizenry that you need to see in a country, in cities. So the very definition of agriculture, where we try to quantify and measure and even our policy instruments, they always talk to market, processing, scaling up. You know, for me, if we could just take a step back and perhaps do the basics of understanding agriculture the way we should understand it, not just from a business point of view. That is the first element that I would like to add to the challenge of our perception. The second perception is because money talks and there are financial institutions generating a lot of value out of agriculture, we also tend to fail to understand the role of smallholder farmers. You know, when you shared that topic of discussion with us, I was just quickly checking some FAO statistics and globally what the role of smallholder farmer is. And one of the most surprising statistics that I came up with that 80% of the farm that we have in the world is operated with less than 2 hectares of farm, 80%. But that 80% only constitutes 12% of the world cultivated area. However, the most striking statistics is that 12% of cultivated land provides more than 80% of food consumed in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. So you just you work out the numbers. So this very biased and vague perception that smallholder agriculture doesn't work, and we so often tend to stigmatize this whole thing of, and then even informal markets and household farming. The world statistics clearly shows that, so our technology transfer needs to be tailored and packaged in such a way that it goes to serve the household, because that's why I say a structural problem. Our policy talks to size, commercialization and market and etc. Whereas the food and nutrition security and economic security elements talks towards small-scale farming. The way our technology is packaged and the way our needs point, those two are mismatching. I think that's where I see the problem is.
So I think what you've said now brings us to our next, let's talk call it the next section of our discussion. It's really around understanding these models that we hear about. And I think, you know, for people who followed the development of the South African, let's call it agricultural sector, the creation of these associations that in essence commodity-based, those kinds of associations have in essence taken over the agricultural sector. Yes, we speak about you know, the inability of farmers to control the price at which they sell their produce, but many of these associations are able to develop these market access routes right through to countries in the EU and so forth, and the Far East, and in very large quantities are able to send their produce over to those countries for, in essence, the euro or the dollar. All of that excludes the smallholder farmer, and that is a bit of a tragedy. But of course, you know, we've also seen in the case of South Africa where these associations have come forward and said, we want to work with smallholder farmers. This is how we will work with these smallholder farmers. Are these models actually helping? Are they assisting? And if not, what do you think should in essence be put in place as far as these models are concerned? The question I'm really asking is, are these models working? And if not, what's the problem? Is the case of we will do it for ourselves, or do you think there is scope for partnering with these large commodity-based associations, which I think, truth be told, are in essence white-owned agricultural commodity systems? Just tell us a bit about that. Will we ever get to a stage in South Africa where we're able to share resources and so forth, have access to these funding instruments and so forth? Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Doc. I think, for me it's twofold. And I speak as a commercial farmer privately. That setup is very well established and it's obviously running the show. Then you get us who are developing / trying to get into that sector, but also smallholder in this particular instance. I think for me, we will spend a lot of years trying to crack this particular well-established system. We have to create our own, okay? And in saying so, I'm not being radical at any joint. I'm just particularly saying the amount of energy we will spend trying to be 3,000 hectares, 50,000 head of cattle, hectares and hectares of pecan nuts as a single individual. Those guys and that setup, it will always be part of what we're doing. So I think what we need to do as people who are working in the space of developing farmers, we need to create a system where we learn from history. Subsidization was done. Our farmers currently in South Africa are competing with global farmers that are getting subsidies. Okay? That's the reality. Now, even under those pressures, we're still a competitive industry. So I think the system in which exists, we need to take learnings from it. You can't run away from the fact that affordability is important. You know, household food security to us is important. What is the definition of commercialization? To us, it's not 60,000 hectares at 5 tons a hectare if you're producing maize. To us, it's the ability to sell, access produce, and get financial return thereof. That's commercialization. Everybody talks about transformation thereof. Transformation to us, as people who are working with developing farmers, is taking someone from 1 hectare to 5 hectares to 10 hectares under production. Anything in this game of agriculture is gradual. The current partnership public, they call it, I don't know if it's PPs or triple Ps, those setups have got their own role. I repeat, I stand here as a partner to a Fortune 100 company, John Deere. Now, what did we do? What did we say to John Deere? John Deere, our farmers are not going to afford tractors worth 500,000. Eastern Cape has got vast tracts of land, right? We in the grand commercial space because that's what the market demands down there, okay? And that's the consumption in terms of access to market. So how do we put together a model? I'm talking to innovative partnerships now. How do we put together a model to make sure that the farmer has got access to agricultural mechanization equipment to produce the quality tonnage and also pay back? So we've done that. It's working. There's 15 beneficiaries, of which 7 are women. The point that I'm trying to drive home is at least from my view, we will spend decades trying to crack that system of the established. We need to create our own, which is important to say, are we answering critical elements? What's the financing component? If someone has to go and be in a position of obtaining financing, how are we setting up crop session and offtake opportunities for these farmers? So we have to be in a position of developing our own, but understanding the fact that, aggregation becomes important. If a farmer goes and sells 500 bags of maize by themselves individually, they're not going to get anywhere in terms of seeing, because some of them are selling in a market where they have to wait for the market to get pension every month for those that understand rural setups. So by the time they plan production, they're already 2-3 months because they don't have the finances ready. So how are we coming in and aggregating production, therefore allowing the farmer to be in a position of obtaining financing on time to go back to the land? So to us, there is opportunity, but I think we have to run our own stream as of now, as of yesterday. And that stream brings in the conversation of the governments of the world, the private sector of the world, because I know there are private companies that are wanting to partner. I know there are private companies that are reaching out, but they always miss the jockey to run with them, to give them results. I think for us, that's what we're missing from a system to be able to get the results that needing to be. Because, these policies speak wonderful. Let's be frank. If you look at any policy, you will get the exact thing of how the country should look like. Yeah. But how many of those policies are actually in practice? And I think the governance and the system is very hard track, but what are we doing to develop our own within that particular system? Because we need to stand up and be jockeys. But again, are we prepared for that? And that's where passion comes in. Because you can't be in this industry if you think that you're going to wake up and everything's going to happen for you by yourself. You have to work hard. You have to wake up. And I think that's what I always say to young people my age. You have to prepare yourself to be an acceptable candidate for support. And I think that's where we're sitting as a country, I think.
So, Mike, these jockeys that we're hearing about, what's needed to create more jockeys? Do we need training interventions? Do we need job shadowing? Do we need people to be brave, like Technology Innovation Agency, to say let's fund risk because that's what we do? What's needed in the system?
Well, jockey. I think is that the guy who rides a horse?
Yes, that's that jockey.
Yeah, that one. But before I get to the jockey, I need to make this statement. He who pays the piper plays the tune. You've heard that statement before. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because those who designed the system that is in place do so with a purpose in mind. And their purpose is not to sort these problems of yours out. Let's make peace with that. It's a design problem. They sit where they sit and they say, no, we want to do this thing and this is the object. Let me tell you a sad story. I was in the Free State talking to a cattle farmer the other day and we had a long discussion. When he greeted me to leave his farm, he said, you know, Mike, you guys can keep your democracy. We will continue to feed the nation in the meantime. I was very upset, and all the way I drove home, I regretted why I went to visit this fellow. But the truth is, and when I got home, I said this to my family, and they said, but what's your problem? No, and I told them how racist and whatever else I said. I said, no, the problem is that you are not able to deal with the truth that you're being told. So grow up. And so from that day on, I changed. But I lost a few hairs, as you can see, on my solar panel. Now, but here's the real issue. The joke is, and what is it that needs to be done? Yes, we need new role models. We need role models that say to younger people, farming is sexy, that you can actually make a living out of farming. And there's a historical problem with that kind of statement. Those of us who grew up during the days of apartheid, you grew up with your dad wearing gumboots, who worked on a farm, who had a torn overall, and probably a hat which was supposed to be protecting him from the sun, but had a hole on the head. Now your dad, my dad would have said to you, my son, I'm sending you to school to get a good education. Do not come back here and be like me. Go to Sandton, get sharp-pointed shoes and get the corner office. And so we went. And so those of us who had the privilege of some education were aspiring to go to Sandton because we wanted to sit in that chair that swings around. Wompit and his sons, he says to him, Sien, you moet terugkom plus 2. Because you see, I've raised you out of this operation. So the thinking is very different. On a Friday afternoon, when we dark-skinned people race towards the city, the other people go to the north and they go to the farm to go and do work. We go our way to go and spend money which we don't have in the city, to spend this money that they produce on the land. So the psyche is problematic. We're thinking wrong. That's the one thing. So thought leadership is key and critical in there, and I'm not hearing that voice loud enough. Regrettably, government does not understand this voice, they themselves. And here is the problem. I normally say to people, I go to these economic workshops, and people come and make lovely presentations, and they tell me about entrepreneurship and so on and so forth. These are government officials, and I'm saying this with all due respect. And I said, but have you ever run a spaza shop? This presenter, and this fellow says, no. I said, you ever run a spaza shop and you come in to tell me about running a proper business? You cannot be knowing what you're talking about. Entrepreneurship is hard. You better know what it is that you're getting yourself involved in. You spend sleepless nights, you walk into a room with your red eyes, the fence is broken, the animals have gotten out of your farm. The hard realities. And we need to be able to tell these stories by people like us, that these youngsters look at and say, but I want to be like Uncle Mike. He seems to be okay. We need a few more Uncle Mikes who look like they are successful, who can pay the bills out of this farming, but who can tell a true story of farming and not what the textbook says or some fancy government policy says. So that's the reality check. We need to have realignment of thinking and policy in government. I hear everybody saying, yeah, people must go and farm. I say, hey, but you don't tell them how hard farming is. You also don't tell them that someday you're going to be hungry. We need to speak truth to power. We need to be sincere. And I don't expect government to speak that language, for they too know no better. But us as practitioners need to do that. We also need to look at these technologies that are out there and see how do we translate them, how do we hold hands with these government-owned institutions and say, but how can we leverage, how can we translate these exceptional policies into real-life results and products? I was saying to Dr. Makadlela here the other day, that what if we could convert 0.01% of these outcomes, Dr. Michael, Prof, that you guys produce into real-life solutions? When you write these PhD proposals, do you not ask the question, and how is this going to make the life of an African child better? What real-life problem are we solving? Or are you writing this proposal to get an NRF rating, which is not a bad idea, by the way? We also need to make that change of mindset and say, but how is it that this work that we're doing going to make an impactful difference on the ground? So there's a thought leadership issue. There's a practical aspect, how we're going to go about doing these things. There's a financing part that says we need to create innovative ways of funding and financing this. By the way, Dr. Pehan, black people have had exceptional financing mechanisms. They have done crowdfunding for many years immemorial. What has happened to that intellect? People in Ethiopia, I read somewhere, have found a way of getting an agricultural stock exchange. And I'm sure Michael might tell us a bit some more about that. What has happened to that ability that we can tap into such knowledge? So it is not as bad as it seems. I think we have got what it takes. We must just apply ourselves and get on with the work. It's not going to be easy, but it can and must be done.
So in conclusion, colleagues, I think we're coming to the end of our session. I'd just like to know from each of you one good piece of advice you can give to policymakers and lawmakers of our country in terms of supporting smallholder farmers. What is that one thing you would say if you're in Parliament on whatever day it is when the SONA is held?
Allow us people who are doing to help you make the decisions and draw up the policies. I think it's high time that it's very difficult to make a policy about farmers without farmers. And I don't know how many of those farmers who have the privilege to be part of those rooms have got practical experience in the realities of the harshness on the ground. So I think the sooner we invite those who feel the sun and feel the financial heat and feel the pressures, you will probably get better outcomes and quicker results. So yeah, invite us. It won't be a bad investment.
All right. I think from my side, there are two. On the one hand, there's a practical aspect of understanding the needs of farming in smallholder context and how to integrate them. I think those conversations so often are done within the policy space, and the real role players are not part of that conversation. That's the first aspect I want to say. The other challenge, which we really haven't touched more, is where we need to get involved. My advice would be is that for government and for policymakers to understand the international and global dynamics. The reason why I'm saying this is that so often it is a lot easier and it's okay for our resources to go to the West and for us to buy a lot of things from the West. But the moment you try to sell something to the West, there is so many questions and so many things. And if you start complaining or trying to protect, then those World Trade Organization clauses and rules will be read to you and etc. But if I take, for example, the citrus industry, very simply. South Africa is the second or third most largest citrus producer, competes closely with Spain. it's okay for the world to buy citrus from Spain, but the moment there is some kind, the kind of scrutiny our citrus product goes through in the global market, you wouldn't believe it. You might have heard it in the news, you might have read it in the on television, heard it on the TV, and etc. So there is this imbalance in trade and policy that really is making us carry the burden that we shouldn't be carrying in that space. There is that lack of fairness. So if our governments could really stamp their authority and say, hang on, this is not the terms of trade that we're going to work with, so that we need a better understanding of this. The third and most important thing is perhaps for our government to have some, I don't like this regulatory framework, because our regulatory framework now is very, very complicated, and that is the one big stumbling block that is stopping the smallholder farmers from functioning. But on the other hand, it's a lot easier for our resources to leave the country by big international role players. So if it is so simple for the big international role players to make good use of our resources, why have we made it very complicated for our own farmers to make good use of those resources? I think those will be my 3 recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Mike, your recommendations.
Mine straightforward and simple. One, those of us who've got the benefit of the platform, as my colleague says, must speak loud and speak more. Secondly, we need to hold hands with these institutions, and I've said this, I'm repeating myself. There's so much help out there, particularly in these institutions, the CSIRs, the TIAs, the ARCs, that if we held hands with these organizations, and by the way, if you get to know their mandate, you'll realize that you'd not be asking them to do anything else other than what they're meant to do in the first instance. And I can safely here say in the presence of ARC senior people, including the one sitting next to me. So we need to work closely with them. We need to think exactly how do we turn this tide. And we need to move away from this dependency mentality. I know, I used to work for government in my previous life. We told people, no, we're going to give you a free house, we're going to give you a free this, we're going to give you a free next, and today we give you a free grant. That I find very problematic. And so we need to rise beyond that and say, okay, thank you very much for giving me this free, this, that, and the other. But surely we can apply ourselves, and that bit of effort will yield great results. And so it is these kinds of conversations, Dr. Pehane, not only conversations, but then that say, what are we going to do when we walk out of here? Thank you.
Thank you. So, colleagues, I think our time is up, but I think in summary, we're hearing from, you can give them a round of applause, yes. So I think in summary, we're hearing that smallholder farmers are not at the negotiation table, nor are they at that table where these policies are being created, these policies that affect them, in essence, and their livelihood. We're hearing that smallholder farmers must learn to do it for themselves. Some have started. It is for government to support those own initiatives with the funding that's required and access to facilities and infrastructure. We certainly know of the presence of the ARCs, CSRs, you name it, around the country, the TIAs of this world, that have the support and the mandate, in essence, to address smallholder farmer challenges. These are, in essence, mandates coming from government itself, and there's no reason for us to participate in those discussions to assist smallholder farmers. We've heard about beautiful policies. The issue is around the enablers around those policies. What needs to be in place to enable those policies to do that which they were, I suppose, created for? And finally, colleagues, we're hearing that all these issues around market access, around skills development and so forth, are all things that we have within our country that in essence need to be put together in innovative ways, as it were, for the benefit of our smallholder farmers. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much, colleagues, for participation, and thank you very much to our esteemed panel for their inputs. Good afternoon.
So today I've got a group of clever people who will tell us all about science diplomacy and how that can help us communicate science and use science better than we currently are doing. So the proposed topic for today is inclusive science diplomacy, breaking barriers to sustainability and leaving no one behind. I've been given quite a number of stats here, which I'm not going to read a lot on, but I think it's important for us to just give some context to why this conversation is important. So thank you very much. So we are aiming to get views from our panelists on how they transcended from studying science, being clever students there. They got into the various industries they are in, and how they hope to see what they do change the lives of ordinary people in our country and the continent. So some of the stats I was given were of facts, are, for example, that the annual PhD production in South Africa is 1,300. And the goal is to be at 5,000 for South Africa. International researcher training and mobility programs are a high priority for the country. You've seen the investment that we see the DSI and the likes of the NRF and the research councils making to do this. We have 62% of postdoctoral fellows that are non-South African in the country, and lesser, of course, for South Africans. We also have a rate of male researchers at 55% compared to 44.1% female researchers. And if you look at race, we mostly have whites at 50.5%, white South Africans, and Africans at 32.2%. So it's the context I want us to have as we are talking here, and we talk about how what we do can lead us to changing the statistics. But before we do that, may I invite the panelists to quickly introduce yourselves, just in a minute or less.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Daniel Ndima. I'm the CEO of K-Bio. We are molecular biologists experts. We develop enzymes and diagnostic test kits. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nomandla Ngoya. I'm doing my PhD in chemistry at UKZN, and I'm also the founder of a company called DChem Group, which started off as a detergent manufacturing company, and now we are more into pipe jointing lubricants. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Batabile Ramalapa. I'm a health innovation specialist, and currently I work with the CSIR as a researcher working on developing drug treatments that are effective, affordable, and of good quality for the African environment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Toza Makrobani, a program officer for Africa and International Partnerships at the Academy of Science of South Africa. I'm also a member of the South African Young Academy of Science. My role at ASAF is mainly to support cross-border type of science advisory activities to maintain and support multilateral and bilateral type of partnerships with other academies within the continent. Activities like the BRICS Summit for Young Scientists that we recently had, we were participants there in other activities. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize we have that one. Okay, thank you very much. You can see that we have quite a lot of rich experience here. And what is also common about my panelists is that they are all young people. So I'm sure there's a lot of bright, fresh ideas we'll get out of them. I must say, again, before we get into what they're going to tell us today, that the Science Diplomacy Capital for Africa was, amongst others, created to be a thread that links all the science, technology, and innovation programs that we run in South Africa and beyond South Africa, in the continent and the world. Because you will know that there's many research councils that do many scientific programs, same as universities in the country. Government also plays in that space, as well as the private sector. But somehow we don't have a way of linking all of this. Someone earlier was complaining, mentioning what we all know, the phenomenon of us working in silos just collaborating on specific projects, but not taking these forward as a value chain to get us to where we want to be. So at the core of the science diplomacy for Africa is us not only doing science and innovation for the sake of publications and patents, but translating that into changing the lives of the people of South Africa and the continent. So now, if I can turn back to our panelists, sorry about that. Starting with you, Dr. Gqobani, who has, if you've seen her bio, quite a rich portfolio of awards, including the DSI's Women in Science Award. At some point, she was the co-chair of the South African Young Academy of Science, which is a young academy that has relations with other young academies across the world. And not only that, now she works on international partnerships for ASAF. So what do you think can be done to bring in the fold the work of scientists and making sure that this contributes to science diplomacy and contributes to what I was talking about, which is changing the lives of ordinary people?
Thank you, Program Director. Firstly, when you talk about science diplomacy, it's more about the entanglement between science, policy, and international relations. This is critical. It's critical mainly because the challenges that we're having, they have an international and a global type of dimension. So therefore, you will see STI being embedded where they are talking about foreign policies, where they are talking about the national agenda. And STI also, because it underpins the solutions to these challenges that we're having. So as a nation, for example, at the Academy of Science of South Africa, we have been very active, especially during when COVID-19 emerged, with regards to press release on the implication of COVID-19, with regards to the cost implication due to COVID-19, working with other academies because there's a need of co-creation, there's a need of collective leadership that transcends borders. As I mentioned before, because of the complexity of the challenges that we're having, that need a dynamic thinking and a collective effort. So we have a number of scientists. So when you talk about ASAF, it's more of an ensemble of scientists that are dedicated and are passionate about the advancement of scientific knowledge within our communities, and as well at a global stage. So the activities, they vary. They vary from webinar, they vary from, the topics that are pivotal. Like, for example, we have now a study that is looking at climate change, which is not only done in South Africa, but is done with our SADC counterpart, our SADC academies. And I'll just make one example also that is important. One of the activities that we had at the sidelines of the World Science Forum, which was in South Africa, in Cape Town, where we had about 11 member states. And what we're looking at we're looking at how can we strengthen the role of academies when it comes to implication of the STI, as well as when it comes to policy for the benefit of our society. Program Director, I hope I've answered your question.
You have, but the audience will have to judge at some point. So coming to you, Dr. Ramalapa. Again, she's got a PhD in some very complicated stuff, chemical sciences, pharmaceutical sciences. I'm reading everything that I see here. Her work contributes to the work of the WHO. She has worked for the South African Medical Research Council, so you can imagine she's built quite a lot of relations where she has been doing her studies and work experience. Now, good doctor, we all know that it's impossible to separate science diplomacy from the actual work that is being done by scientists. Even if we talk artificial intelligence and we talk computational modeling, we know that these are set to play crucial roles in international scientific cooperation. Now, how do you expect developments in science and technology, whether it's applied science or it's blue sky, to shape the future of science diplomacy? And are there any issues that you believe to be of growing importance to the field of science diplomacy?
Thank you for that question. So I'm really glad that in South Africa currently we've seen the need of not separating science and innovation. And so our Department of Science, what was previously known as Science and Technology, is no longer called that. It's called the Department of Science and Innovation, because I think that it's important for us to realize and to go along with the global trends that we can no longer just do science for the sake of doing science. So I was sitting with some postgraduate students yesterday, and they were talking about the differences between science, research, and innovation. And they found themselves at crossroads with what we would call seasoned researchers, especially in academia, where they're saying, how do I then change the system? Because what I want to do is innovation. I don't want to do what people call science and research. I want to do innovation. And what that does is then it brings everything together. So innovation is not just science, as you know it, as your maths, your physics, and English. It brings social sciences. It brings environmentalists. It brings climate change, ambassadors together. And that's what we should be focusing on when we talk about science diplomacy. In fact, maybe we should call it innovation diplomacy, because we want to keep people from focusing on the fact that when we talk about diplomatic relationships, we're only focusing on people that go into the lab and do innovation, because someone does innovation in the township. We were talking about how innovation comes up in South Africa, and someone said, in the rest of the world, the reason why they put science and innovation together is because when people do innovation, they are forward-looking. They think about vision. What would we like the world to look like? But in South Africa, if you really think about it, innovation comes from frustration and lack. So we innovate because we have a lack of service delivery. We innovate because there is a problem that we have, and we want to solve it. Whereas other people will innovate because they think about the future and what they want to see. So we really need to be able to talk about diplomacy as not being something that's for scientists, but something where we look at, there are people in the township who are innovating because of their lack, and they're bringing solutions to the problems that we have. That will be able, because the problem you have in South Africa is probably the problem as someone has in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, in Nigeria. So you need to think about it in that way. How do we bring innovators together to solve problems for Africa? And when you focus more on technology, what if that technology is not available in Nigeria? That means they can't use it in Nigeria, and that means you're not solving a problem for Africa, you're solving a problem for South Africa because of the technology that South Africa has access to and that they are exposed to. So we need to start thinking about, how do you support not only the people that have access to a laboratory, not only the people that have access to the most complicated technology, but how do you put together these different African countries in diplomatic relationships to say, we are going to support innovators, people who are coming up with solutions to the problems that we have that can be implemented, not just in South Africa or not just in any country that has access to technology, but you can implement it in any country in Africa that doesn't need to have the access to these high-tech things.
Thank you for that. One of the reasons we decided to get involved as a municipality in an initiative like this, it's because we don't like science for the sake of science and science for the sake of being in a laboratory, but we want to see that the innovations that we talk about are innovations that can solve service delivery challenges. And I like that you are mentioning that those innovations don't necessarily have to be tech-based. They could be things that people do in villages to survive. And one strong element of this platform, the SDCFA, is creating those networks, sharing experiences across African countries, because a lot of the problems we have in South Africa can actually have solutions that already exist in Ghana or Nigeria. Thank you for that reminder. Then Ms. Ngoya Nomandla, a CEO, very young CEO, dynamic, brilliant, bearing in mind that you work for your own company and the private sector is all about profit margins. And now we come here and talk about advocacy and getting other people involved and networking. How do you think science diplomacy can benefit SMMEs in a way that is sustainable to the uptake of technologies and innovations in foreign markets? One of the things that we included as an objective of the SDCFA was to involve the private sector, because we want more investment in science, technology, and innovation in Africa. What we've seen is that generally, when you have these diplomatic missions all over the world, they invest quite a lot in big economies, but I don't think we communicate enough about the scientific knowledge and capability we have as an African continent. And combined with that, we said, let's get the private sector involved, because most investment will come from the private sector. But now for a small company like yours, how do you think science diplomacy can benefit SMMEs?
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, I do believe that you guys are doing something to a certain extent for the SMMEs, of which there are some programs that I've benefited from as a small scientist, where I was given an opportunity to go to Germany last year for 2 weeks, where I wanted to learn more about the biodegradable industry, because right now I'm making cleaning stuff, which is your dishwashing liquid, tile cleaners, and so on. But I only have one biodegradable product, which is a liquid laundry detergent. So in Germany, when I went there, like almost everything is green. Even the Fanta orange is like a real orange, you know. So I got an opportunity to go into the supermarkets. They have dishwashing liquids that are green. Everything is green. So I really do feel that South Africa is trying, and yes, we do have to, you guys do have to do more, but it's still a challenge for us scientists to actually make an attempt as well to meet you guys halfway, because I remember when we went to Germany, they struggled so much with getting people who would be part of the program, and initially it was advertised as a call, but then they had to resort to emails where they had to call someone to find out if they could be somebody who benefits from the program. So I think it is an advertising thing, and also trying to encourage scientists to go into science where they commercialize their research. Because I remember when I started my business, I was doing my research in medicinal chemistry, where I was focusing on finding a better cure for diabetes, and I had managed to actually make something that performed 3 times better than Acarbose, which is the current drug that is used for diabetes. But I struggled so much with the commercialization because of all the clinical trials that have to go into it. And I feel like nobody tells us about how difficult this is, and it became very draining to me to actually proceed with this. That's where I eventually went into something different, which was easier to commercialize, but I have not stopped dreaming about my initial idea of getting a better cure for diabetes. But because not enough information is out there for us, it becomes a struggle. So through science diplomacy, I really do hope that we do encourage, advertise, yeah.
Thank you very much. If there's anybody from TI here, you can see there's a need here to help entrepreneurs with commercialization especially, but the rest of the value chain for us to support them better than we currently are doing. But thank you for having mentioned that at least you benefited from what was done. Now coming to you, Mr. Ndima, another young dynamic person who is not only just a scientist but is an entrepreneur, has been involved in commercialization. Do you have anything to say to her actually about what she's just said?
Yeah, I mean, I know her for some time because we are such a small community. And in fact, when we started, we were in the same incubation in Cape Town at the One Bio. We spent some time there, so I would say that we have the benefit of being in such a program. I think it got taken now by BioCity, and now Uvu Bio has taken over, which is literally biotech-based incubation, which is very deliberate. I think if you don't know about them, please find out about them. If you're a student or you're an aspiring entrepreneur, there are many ecosystems that are there that are already playing a role in the science diplomacy. But in terms of the work that we are talking about, especially the topic today, I think there is no problem that doesn't need a solution, and there's no solution that wouldn't fit for a problem. I think sometimes when we speak about the science diplomacy,